The Battle of Refugio was fought from March 12 to 15, 1836, near Refugio, Texas. Mexican General José Urrea and 1,500 Centralista soldiers fought against Nzeemin B. King and his 28 American volunteers and Lieutenant Colonel William Ward and his approximately 120 Americans. The battle, a part of the Goliad campaign of the Texas Revolution, resulted in a Mexican victory and splintered Texan resistance. Background: under President Antonio López de Santa Anna, the Mexican government began to shift away from a federalist model to a more centralized government. His increasingly dictatorial policies, including the revocation of the Constitution of 1824 in early 1835, incited Federalists throughout the nation to revolt. The Mexican army quickly put down revolts in the Mexican interior, including a brutal suppression of militias in Oaxaca and Zacatecas. Unrest continued in the Mexican state Coahuila y Texas. The area that bordered the United States, known as Texas, was populated primarily by English-speaking settlers, known as Texians. In October, the Texians took up arms in what became known as the Texas Revolution. The following month, Texians declared themselves part of a state independent from Coahuila and created a provisional state government based on the principles of the Constitution of 1824. By the end of the year, all Mexican troops had been expelled from Texas. Determined to quash the rebellion, Santa Anna began assembling a large force to restore order. By the end of 1835, his army numbered 6,019 soldiers. In late December, at his behest, the Mexican Congress passed the Tornel Decree, declaring that any foreigners fighting against Mexican troops will be deemed pirates and dealt with as such. Being citizens of no nation presently at war with the Republic and fighting under no recognized flag. In the early 19th century, captured pirates were executed immediately. The resolution thus gave the Mexican army permission to take no prisoners in the war against the Texians. Santa Anna personally led the bulk of his troops inland to San Antonio de Beacutexar and ordered General José de Urrea to lead 550 troops along the Atascosita road toward Goliad. Urrea's efforts to quell the rebellion along the Texas Gulf Coast have become known as the Goliad Campaign. Prelude: Colonel James Fannin and his men had improved the fortifications at the old Presidio La Bahia and renamed it Fort Defiance. News of the fate of Texians under Frank W. Johnson at the Battle of San Patricio and James Grant at the Battle of Agua Dulce created confusion rather than stirring the volunteers gathered at Goliad into action. On March 7, Luis Ayres brought Fannin news from Refugio, a town 25 miles south of Goliad. A week before, the Victoriana Guardists, a group of Tejano who supported centralism, had ransacked the town. After destroying much property, the Guardists, under the command of Carlos de la Garza, made camp just outside the town. Several pro-independence Anglo families, including Ayres' wife and children, remained in Refugio, afraid that if they stayed they would be captured by the Mexican army, but that if they left they would be harmed by de la Garza's men. Fannin agreed to send troops to evacuate the settlers as soon as wagons were available to assist with the transport. 3 days later, the army's wagons returned from Port Lavaca with supplies for the garrison. As soon as they were unloaded, Fannin called for volunteers to go to Refugio. On March 11, Captain Nzeemin B. King led 28 men and most of the wagons to evacuate the settlers. They arrived that evening and camped for the night at Mission Nuestra Señora del Refugio, where some of the Anglo families had taken refuge. The following morning, King led his troops to the ranch of Esteban López, where the family of Luis Ayres was staying. King arrested 6 Taínos he had heard were ransacking abandoned homes. After he learned that other Taínos were plundering homes about 8 miles south, King took half of his men on an unauthorized mission to pursue them. They rode into an ambush staged by a group of De la Garza's men and Karankawa Indians. The Texians extricated themselves from the fight and returned to the Lopez Ranch. All of the families gathered there were then escorted to the mission in Refugio. Arria's advance cavalry arrived in Refugio shortly after King's men. Mexican troops and De la Garza's guardes surrounded the mission. King sent a messenger to Fanon, asking for reinforcements. Earlier that day, Fanon had received notice that Mexican troops had taken the Alamo, killing all of the defenders. Battle. Fanon dispatched William Ward, commanding a group from Peyton S. Wyatt and the Georgia Battalion to assist King. Ward made his stand at the mission and a furious battle ensued. Although successful in breaking up the siege on the 13th, the arrival of Ward at Refugio led to a conflict over command between the two officers. This dispute caused the insurgents to break into several smaller detachments. King left and ventured to attack a nearby ranch, believed to be occupied by Centralistas, killing 8. As more of Arria's troops arrived, the fighting with Ward's men continued. The groups held their own on the 14th, repelling 4 assaults, killing 80 to 100 Mexican troops and wounding 50. The Texians suffered light losses, but were now short on ammunition and supplies. King returned from his raid in the evening but could not get to the mission for safety. They had to fight from a tree line across from it, near the Mission River, where they also inflicted heavy losses upon the Mexican army. Ward sent courier James Humphreys to Fanon for orders. Edward Perry returned word from Fanon to fall back to Victoria, where Texian forces were to later regroup. At night, the groups attempted the escape. The wounded and a few others would remain behind. Their flight seemed successful at first, but there were overwhelming numbers of Mexican troops in wait. Each group was subsequently defeated and its survivors captured by Arria's troops. After battling for 12 hours and inflicting heavy casualties on their enemies, the last group of fleeing Texians only suffered 1 killed and 4 wounded. King and 32 men surrendered on the 15th because their remaining powder had become unusable after crossing the river. They were returned as prisoners of war to the Refugee Omission. On March 16, 15 men were executed, King and the remnants of his company, and several of Ward's men. Juan José Holzinger, a German-Mexican officer, saw fit to save Louis T. S., Francis Dieterich, Benjamin Odlum and 8 men from local families. The remaining 15 men were spared to serve the Mexican army as artisans. Ward and the bulk of his men escaped toward Copano, then turned at Melon Creek and headed for Victoria, where he thought Fanon should be. Hearing the gunfire on the Calito Creek as they moved on. At Victoria, they found no time for rest. It was overrun with Arria's troops. The group was forced to scatter after a short skirmish with Arria's cavalry. Staying off the main roads, they moved toward La Vaca Bay, with 10 of them eventually escaping. The remainder were captured on March 22 by Arria, 2 miles from Dimmock's Landing. Informed of Fanon's surrender, Ward's group was marched back to Victoria, where Holzinger again saved 26 men, by conscripting them as laborers for Arria. Arria had left Colonel Telesforo Alaves in charge of Victoria. Senora Francita Alaves intervened with her husband as well, to make sure the captive laborers' lives would be saved. The remainder were sent to Goliad by March 25. Fanon learned of Ward and King's fate on the 17th and had finally left for Victoria on the 19th, which proved to be too late, as the right wing of the Mexican army was now in place to capture Fort Defiance. Fanon and his command would never make it to Victoria. Overview and outcome. The majority of Texian deaths occurred following the rift between King and Ward. Fannin had received orders from General Sam Houston while King and Ward were away that directed him to evacuate Goliad and retire to Victoria as soon as possible. Reluctant to leave before various detachments returned, Fannin failed to leave Goliad ahead of Arria's advance, leading to the Battle of Colito. Legacy. In the public square across the street from the county courthouse in Refugio, the King Monument stands as an honor to Captain King and his men. In the early 1900s, the square was owned by the state of Texas and was named King's State Park. Bibliography. Davis, William C. Lone Star Rising, College Station, TX. Texas A&M University Press, ISBN 9781585445325, originally published 2004 by New York Free Press. Edmondson, J.R. The Alamo Story from History to Current Conflicts. Plano, TX. Republic of Texas Press. ISBN 1-55622-678-0. Groneman, Bill. Alamo Defenders, A Genealogy. The People and Their Words. Austin, Texas. Eakin Press. ISBN 0-89015-757-X. Hardin, Stephen L. Texian Iliad, A Military History of the Texas Revolution. Austin, Texas. University of Texas Press. ISBN 0-292-73086-1. OCLC 29704011. Scott, Robert. After the Alamo. Plano, TX. Republic of Texas Press. ISBN 9781556226915. Stewart, J. Slaughter at Goliad. The Mexican Massacre of 400 Texas Volunteers. Naval Institute Press. ISBN 978159114-843-2. Toddish, Timothy J. Toddish, Terry, Spring, Ted. Alamo Sourcebook, 1836. A Comprehensive Guide to the Battle of the Alamo and the Texas Revolution. Austin, Texas. Eakin Press. ISBN 978157168-152-2.